interview today. We had a student volunteer from Beijing Normal University. You had a lecture titled Future Trends of Design Learning in the Global Context at April in Beijing. So today's interview will be related to you. The first question is the emerging technologies such as tablet PC, wearable devices, 3D printers, interactive whiteboard, educational game, and etc. is more and more popular in the classroom of all education levels, especially in K-12 schools. So my question is, what and how do these emerging technologies transform K-12 teaching and learning? What role do they play in the K-12 classroom? Thanks.
Okay, well, I'll try and give an answer. The question assumes that these new technologies, in fact, are transforming K-12 teaching and learning, and I do not think that's true. I think they have the potential to transform learning and instruction, but basically they're not doing that. What I see happening more and more often, especially in American schools, is that new technologies are being used according to what I think of as a replacement strategy. So they don't change the organization of the learning, they don't change the learning activities, they just substitute one technology for an older technology. So the interactive whiteboard, for example, is replacing the chalkboard or a whiteboard. But they're not really taking full advantage of the interactivity. In an earlier generation, the television was introduced into the classroom, and that was going to replace the teacher. No strategies changed. Pedagogy didn't change. It was a replacement strategy. And because primarily we've been using replacement strategies, there's been no transformation. So that's what I believe there. There is the potential to do that, but if you really want to transform K-12 schools, you need much more than technology, new technologies. You need a lot of teacher training, teacher education, preparation, support, maintenance, follow-through, different assessments, restructuring the curriculum. A lot of other things have to happen to transform learning and instruction. Technology is just a drop in the bucket. And right now there's a hole in the bucket, so there's no transformation happening.
Yes.
We are in a technology-rich environment more than ever. We're facing with the ever-changing and complex technology. What are the challenges for K-12 school education and classroom teaching? That's the K-12 school education and classroom teaching. And we see the biggest one for K-12 teachers.
Yeah, that may vary from place to place, school to school, and teacher to teacher. But one of the challenges is teachers are very busy doing what they already do. So finding the time to learn just how to operate a new technology is a challenge. Then the next challenge, once they learn how to use the technology, is integrating it into the learning sequences and learning activities. That requires even more effort and more time. And they get very little support to do that, and they're already very busy. And then if they decide that they really want to make a dramatic change, they're going to have the support of the principal or headmaster or lead teachers. They're going to have parents that are willing to support big changes, and students will have to expect an adjustment period. So there's a lot of challenges about effective integration of technology in the classroom. Most of the teachers I've seen are willing to try, but they don't get the right kind of training and support. So I think the proper teacher training, teacher support is critical.
Which is the biggest one for K-12 teachers?
Yeah, I don't know about the biggest one. I don't know if you know the Bible story about the Exodus from Egypt, and Moses led the people out of Pharaoh's iron fist into a land of freedom. But they wandered 40 years in an area that maybe is 40 miles long. So I used to ask my father, why 40 years? And his answer was, we had to let the other generation die off so a new generation could take over. And I think we need a new generation.
So we've already
had teachers who grew up in one system. they've taught that way for 20 years, and to expect them to suddenly change is not realistic. So we have to start with teacher training the next generation.
I think I have a follow-up question, actually, because you talk about the teachers training there. But how about what the responsibility for that? And who's responsibility for training teachers? Is the policymaker or principal or the teacher itself?
Well, I don't know. In every context, in the U.S., the teachers are trained by schools and colleges of education, and so they set the curriculum, and they try and do it according to state requirements. But they get to the College of Education gets to decide how they're going to train these teachers. And quite often, because not every university has a lot of resources, it happens that the technology in the schools is more advanced than the technology being used in a university to train the teachers. So the teachers that are being trained are not even being trained on the latest technology that they're going to see when they get to the schools. So it's a shared responsibility. But basically, College of Education, the other thing in a College of Education in the U.S., they want to keep all of the courses, they want to control all of the courses and everything the teacher does. So if they're going to get technology support, they don't want to go to another College of Technology or College of Information Studies or Information Science and get outside support. They don't want to go to an instructional design expert to get instructional design. They think they can do it all themselves. And they've been doing it that way for years and years. So they need to open up the doors to have a genuine interdisciplinary training of teachers.
And the third question is about, could you categorize this emerging technology in K-12?
Oh, categorize these emerging technologies. So the way that I think of it, I know you have some ideas of mine, one-to-many, peer-to-peer, formal, informal, and so forth. But the way I think about these technologies are, it's the use of the technology that matters and not the technology itself. And the way I would categorize uses of technology are effective, non-effective. And most of the uses fall into the no significant difference because we do a replacement strategy. So you replace the whiteboard or blackboard with an interactive whiteboard, and there's no improvement in student learning. So I regard that as not an effective technology. It may make the teacher's life a little easier, but it's not improving learning and instruction.
Okay. Or I think, do you have any kind of ideas or kind of reference that any other study already can kind of categorize this kind of technology? We can try to reference.
Well, the way I see it, I mean, they're often put into cloud-based technologies or social networking technologies, or individual tutoring technologies or adaptive technologies.
So no one they kind of
there's multiple categories, and so I wouldn't start with the categories. I would start with what are you trying to achieve, what's the learning you want to support, and then what technology is best suited to support that kind of learning.
The first question is about the digital generation. The digital generation is always thought to have their own characteristics, maybe multiple tasks on them, such as they prefer to read on screen than play books. However, some of the studies have confirmed that the opposite. What do you think about this? Time?
Because her study.
Oh, that's your study? Oh, well, I'm glad you told me that, because I was going to say something.
Because she tried to investigate the difference between the screen and the paper.
And if I had to bet money, I would bet that you found no significant difference is what I would bet on. There's some myths out there. First of all, it seems like one myth is that everybody in the digital generation is the same. That's simply not true. And then if you narrow it down, well, those who were brought up with digital technologies in the home, they have smartphones, are connected to the internet, all of those kids are the same. Not true. So even though they learn how to operate a cell phone, they know how to have friends on Facebook and do iChat and all these other things, they typically don't know how to use those same technologies to support their own learning. So being digitally literate is not the key. Being literate with regard to how to use the technology to support your learning is the key. So we believe the students are more advanced with technology than some of the teachers, but the teachers understand in general how to support learning. They may not know the technology so well, but they're better at supporting learning. And it's just a myth that the kids have these characteristics. Then I also see kids have these mistaken ideas that they can be more productive if they do more than one thing at a time. So multitasking.
Yeah.
And you know, 4G, and you can have multiple windows open and be chatting with 12 people and writing a paper and taking a test all at the same time. There are studies that show, a lot of studies, long before we had personal computers, that show that multitasking tends to degrade performance on each of the tasks involved. So it's a myth that multitasking improves productivity. Only in a rare few people does that happen. The Air Force, for example, selects pilots based on their ability to multitask, because they have to be aware of all of the instrumentation and they have to be aware of the outside environment. And so they select people who tend to do better on multiple tasks. And that's a very rare few people that fall into that category. Yeah.
For K-12 teachers, due to their personal characteristics such as gender, age, professional fields, and computer-assisted learning experience will affect the attitude and practice of the technology adoption. Sorry. How to cope with the ever-changing technology in K-12 classroom for teachers by themselves? Do you have any recommendations, suggestions?
Well, I can tell you what I've learned by making mistakes.
Okay.
So,
You do?
Yeah. Well, a long time ago, I was trying to work with teachers when I was a computer science professor in Alabama. I thought I would volunteer some time working with teachers in an elementary school. They had a new Apple IIe lab that they were not using. And so I thought, well, I'll teach them how to make good use of that lab. The mistake I made was not understanding how busy the teachers were, and I treated them the same way I treated my computer science students. And after the experience was over, indirectly I heard that the message they got from me was that they were incompetent if they didn't learn to use these computers. I never said that, but that's what they were thinking because of the way I treated them. So I didn't respect what they knew and all of their experience. And these were teachers that had 20 or 30 years of experience. Obviously, they're not incompetent. So one thing is to respect and understand the teacher's environment when we're introducing new technologies. So that's a big lesson learned that I learned by not doing that. And then the second one is teachers are well-intentioned. They want to do the right thing. Most teachers are. They really want to support kids and learning. But they're very busy. So if you're making a dramatic change, the second lesson I learned was if you're going to make a big change with regard to technology, step one needs to be to show the teacher that this use of technology will make them more productive. It will make their job easier and not harder. Or it will free up time to do the real instruction that they want to do. And that step is often overlooked. Because we're researchers, we're academics, we believe it. So we think they should believe it. But they don't. And so you need to show and support that this is going to help teachers do what they really want to do better. So that's an overlooked step. And then the third step has to do with how things are introduced, if they're introduced top-down or if the teachers feel empowered to make choices and decisions. So I had a large project in poorly performing rural K-8 schools in the Southeast. So these are schools that were not doing well on adequate yearly performance. And I went in assuming the teachers would not be very good. It turns out that was really not true. The teachers had the most stable job in these rural counties because they were poor counties. It was the teachers they stayed in the job, they were highly respected, but they didn't have the ability to decide which technologies to use and how to integrate those. So in that project, having learned lessons from the past, I decided we'll let teachers pick the technologies, and rather than have them hear from me how this technology helps, we'll have one teacher tell another teacher how the technology they picked helps them be more effective as a teacher. And it turned out that all of those schools came off of the poorly performing list, and one of them moved to the highest performing school in the district. This was a poorly performing rural school. So, several years after we left the project, one school really did well. There were 8 schools involved. Anyway, so yeah, respecting the teachers, understanding what they really need, believing that they want to do the right thing, and then showing them how this technology may help them really improve learning and instruction. Those are important steps we just assume and overlook.
So you think the key point is they can make a community to share for learning, right?
Yeah, and that's hard to do, because these were 3 different states, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, and I wanted to build a community of learners across school boundaries and across state boundaries, and we had technologies to support that. It turns out that, for example, a reading teacher in Alabama, there was only one in the school, and I thought, well, she would naturally want to talk to a reading teacher in Georgia, and we gave them technologies to do that. They didn't do that. What they did was they formed their own local community. So the reading teacher would talk to an English teacher rather than talk in the same school, rather than talk to a reading teacher in another school. So I think, at least in the U.S., at least in those schools, we were not able to create communities of practice that cut across school and state boundaries. And I don't know how it works other places, but I think people like local, and they like the face-to-face contact. Those teachers did anyway.
Thanks. The 6th question is about the policymakers. What should the policymakers do?
Well, that's an easy one. They should all resign.
Oh, really?
Well, they don't listen to researchers, first of all.
Yes.
They don't even listen to the teachers or the parents.
Why they don't listen?
It's hard to say why. I mean, there are political things going on, and I really don't understand politics all that well. But if they want to get reelected, they might listen to a powerful parent group or a powerful lobbyist or so forth.
In USA, right?
In the U.S., that's most of my experience, although I've worked in Indonesia and other places as well. Indonesia, it was actually worse. The Ministry of Education just, didn't really connect well. But it was more state-run. In the U.S., it's at the national level. In Indonesia, in the U.S., it's more state level. But, for example, when they developed, there's something called the Next Generation Science and Math Standards that were developed between 2010 and 2013 to help teachers in public schools do science and math and science education. One of the main thrusts was to integrate engineering into science education. Well, they created standards that are not usable in schools. So they had a few teachers involved in these panels, but the standards all sound great, but they're not implementable. They're not feasible to use by teachers in schools. And there's nothing associated with those standards about retraining the teachers or providing them with all of the support they're going to need to follow the standards. So it was unrealistic. That's what policymakers do. They make things that sound good, but they're not very realistic. They're not practical.
I think it's almost similar situation in multiple countries.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
How about we change the policymaker the leaders in one school? What should the leaders in one school do?
Yeah, I don't see where that question is, but I know what I know.
The question by yourself, right?
You said many questions as we go along.
Sorry.
No, well, that's a good one, actually, because that same study I did with poorly performing schools in the Southeast, one of the things we looked at was the role of the principal or the headmaster in the school. And it turns out that there were 2 schools that did exceptionally well. And both of those schools had principals who were very active and supportive of teachers. The school that did the worst had a principal whose only concern was discipline of the students. And that was actually, well, I better not say which school it was. Anyways, so the school leadership makes a difference, and the leadership needs to be supportive of teachers and recognize their needs and do what they can to support it. If a teacher sees the principal's not being supportive, what motive is there for the teacher to really do extra work to integrate some new technology? On the other hand, the way it's organized in the U.S. is the principal is important, but there's also a district that covers multiple schools, and there's a district supervisor. And that district supervisor can help or hinder progress in individual schools. And I made the mistake of ignoring the district supervisor in one effort, but in a second effort, the district supervisor was the key person and was totally on board, and I had much more success. So again, leadership that's supportive, engaged, and understands the teachers and the students is critical for success in general, and especially with integrating new technologies.
Yeah. Okay.
Ready to move on?
Yeah. Yeah. The sentence is the focus for education reform will be the teachers, not the learners. The teachers' ICT ability will be the essential professional factor for the nowadays education reform. The nature of the education reform is to focus on the teacher education. Do you agree with this viewpoint?
No.
Really?
No, yeah, given what I said, you'd think I might, because I was emphasizing the teachers. But I don't see teachers as alone. It's not an individual unit of analysis. So teachers and students are together. I mean, there's an interaction effect going on. And so to implement change, you have to focus both. If you have to focus on the pedagogy first, technology second. When you focus on the pedagogy, you're looking at both the learners and all of the support given to the learners. The teachers are primarily providing the support, but you have to understand who the learners are. So I think the teachers and the learners together are the focus, and not one rather than the other. But in order to make a change, we have to re-educate teachers. We have to do something different. We have to take students where they are. We don't get a chance to send them off to 4 years of college to become students. I mean, they just are students. So, yeah. But also, we have to, if we make a big change in a classroom environment, for example, instead of going from rows of desks to little working groups, students aren't used to that. If we ask students to work in collaboration with others, they're not necessarily used to that. So we have to help students become used to something that's different. And that's the role of the teacher, is critical in doing that.
The eighth passage follow the seventh. Yes. More and more countries' government have recognized the teacher's ICT ability in an essential professional factor in the information society. In order to improve their ICT ability, many countries have published many plans. For example, the MOE of China have implemented large-scale primary and secondary teacher training regularly, which aims to helping teachers use ICT effectively and update their teaching philosophy. In October 2013, the MOE of China launched the National Primary and Secondary School Teacher ICT Application Capacity Improvement Project, combining training, assessment, and application that focus on teachers' active usage of ICT in daily teaching activities. So what is the starting point for teacher education, in your opinion?
Say no.
Yeah, no, I can't just say no this time, yeah. Well, the starting point at the beginning,
Yes.
Of course, you have to start at the beginning. No, what I think here, because this is a complex kind of situation, and the situation you described, and it's also familiar to me in the U.S., it's coming top down, where the Ministry of Education or someone else has set a policy and sort of mandated, now you will use these next generation science standards. And, well, where were the teachers Did they have a say in making that policy? Were they involved in making the policy? And maybe not. And if they weren't, they're going to resist that kind of change. That's just natural human characteristic. In the U.S., there was a publication called the Roadmap for Education Technology. The National Science Foundation commissioned about a dozen highly regarded researchers and academics to produce this roadmap, how we're going to make effective use of technology in the future. It was led by Beverly Wolf, and it had people like Roy P. and other folks involved, really. And so they provided that to the National Science Foundation. One of the things I remember, one of the areas where they emphasized change was with regard to assessment, and particularly emphasizing formative assessment. So now the government or government agency, the National Science Foundation, has asked academics what they thought. They never asked teachers. And now they're funding projects, but they're not funding projects according to that plan, which they commissioned from the academics, and it didn't even have involvement from the teachers. So this whole idea of policy making and funding and support and developing policies and standards is more disconnected from practice than it should be. So that's one complaint. So I guess the starting point is to involve teachers in this decision, and also students in the decision-making process. And typically we don't do that.
Only policymakers,
Yeah, policymakers are they go get a bunch of academics and say, what do you think? And then they pull out a few things they like from what they heard, and they haven't talked to teachers. They haven't thought about, will it work in a school? Will it really improve learning for these kids? And in a lot of cases, it violates what I call the prime directive. If you know Star Trek, you know the prime directive. Don't interfere with other societies. Well, in my mind, the prime directive for educators is the same as it is for doctors. Do no harm. Do no harm. And these new policies or new uses of technologies can disadvantage certain groups of learners. So now we've made the digital divide worse than it was before because we're so excited about a new technology, or we believe this is going to transform learning and instruction, when the reality is poorly performing kids who started out with a disadvantage are put at a bigger disadvantage because they don't have all of the support, access at home and elsewhere. Do no harm. And we ignore that all the time in educational policy making and practice.
As we know, you and the other two editors of Education Technology Research Development provide the hypothesis of comments to support learning and instruction. The hypothesis include the information objects, knowledge objects, learning objects, instructional objects, course, program, and ongoing effort, with each subsequent component building on the formal components. This sentence is in your article.
I know, I recognize it, I'm guilty, I wrote that.
In another article titled Remarks on MOOCs and Meaningful MOOCs, you argue that most of the MOOCs are not actually courses. The C of MOOC, which stands for course, will be used an R for resources. Many of the MOOCs are more like communities. This sentence is in your lecture.
Yeah.
Could you give more explanation about that?
There's what bothers me is all of the hype that MOOCs are receiving now. So people think, this is going to transform everything, universities will be different, and it's ridiculous. And they give examples of now we can reach thousands and thousands of people that we didn't reach before. But providing access is not the same thing as providing support for learning. So the very first MOOC that was implemented in Canada really was implemented as a community and not a course. It opened what was a small group of learners in a course to a much wider community. But that MOOC was actually a community and not a course. And I think that's the way most of them are. Now, there are some MOOCs that claim to be courses. And the way MOOCs have evolved. So we had the early one in Canada. And then we have people at MIT and Harvard and Stanford jump on board. And at Stanford, they had a famous artificial intelligence professor put his lectures, videotape them, and put things online, and he called that a MOOC. And I don't know, 10,000 people signed up for it. It was a big deal. And, I think, 33 people finished. A very small number of people finished. Well, so what was missing in that was, first of all, there was no instructional design. It was just whatever a famous professor thought. So there's second mistake, so they need to have instructional design. That actually is happening now. The newer MOOCs are recruiting instructional designers, so you get a more coherent sequence of activities and resources. The second mistake that happened was there's no real feedback. The second mistake was a graduate course in artificial intelligence is not a good topic for a MOOC, because getting meaningful feedback during problem-solving activities to 10,000 people is impossible. So the proper subject for a MOOC is something that you can automate feedback for. So you have to have a very narrow focus and a highly structured, well-structured topic domain. So teaching multi-column addition, or teaching particular reading skills or something like that. Then it's focused, and you can have a computer-generated test that's graded with feedback to the student. That's the right kind of topic for a MOOC, and that's what I call a mini MOOC. So that was what I was after. So the other part of the so that was the second mistake. They don't really give appropriate feedback to ensure that learning is likely to occur in most of those MOOCs. And the myth is they're providing access to people that would not otherwise have access. They're not doing that. I mean, the people that succeed in that Stanford MOOC were people who could go to the library and check out a book on artificial intelligence and learn just as much. So they're not helping the learner. They're not getting the support for the learner. Now, the sequence I had was built so we have information objects at the low end. That's anything you can find on the internet or posted on a bulletin board or anywhere else. That's an information object. That's not a typical object to support a course, because we don't know if it's true or not. We don't know if it's valid. We don't know if the information is reliable. So first of all, we have to do a reliability check. Once we know this information is reliable, then it becomes what I call a knowledge object. So other people can check it, and they can have confidence that what's being said or presented or depicted is reliable. That's a knowledge object. Still not suitable for a course, because it needs to be linked to a particular learning goal or objective. Once a knowledge object is linked to a learning goal, then you have a learning object. Now you have something that is a building block of a course. But it's still not a course, because surrounding that learning object, there should be learning activities, there should be formative assessment on how people are performing, and then in the end, summative assessment. So you need to have learning objects with feedback, with learning activities and assessments. Then you have an instructional objects. Most MOOCs don't have all of those characteristics. So that's why I think they're not courses. They're communities. Yeah, so we're not there yet. Yeah, and so that was the point of that editorial and that article.
There's no doubt that the learning analytic technology is a hot topic in the past few years. Learning analytics technology appear especially promising for prediction, intervention, personalized, and adaptation to teaching and learning. What is your opinion about this?
Yeah, this is another myth. Yeah, and so we believe that what works for Amazon with regard to buying products is going to work in the world of learning and instruction. Well, people that go to Amazon are voluntarily giving up some of the information about their buying habits and that sort of thing. So that creates large sets of data that can be used to influence other buyers. The situation in education is different. In China, this actually may work because things are mandated top-down, And so you can actually collect large sets of data, and you don't have to get parents' permission, and you can use students' performance. Maybe you do, I don't know. No, yeah, you don't, but in the U.S. you do. I'll come to the U.S. in a minute. But for learning analytics to work, you need to have large data sets of learners involved with learning objects, if we use the previous analogy, how they performed with regard to a particular learning object, and information about, what worked for those learners who were very much like this struggling learner. And so now I look at the struggling learner, what worked for these other guys who look like him, and I can generate something automatically that's likely to help this learner. That's how learning analytics and personalization can work. And I think that can happen in China. I don't think it's happened yet, but the potential is there. In the U.S., it's very unlikely that it's going to happen for a couple reasons. First of all, the parents don't want that information about their kid being released.
Okay.
Second obstacle is the companies that are collecting the data. There's not one major company. It's not government-run or government-owned. They're competing companies, and they don't want to share their information with other schools that may be using a different product. So those are two big barriers to overcome. And I think it'll be quite some time before we get past those barriers. So limited opportunities in the U.S. There may be other uses for learning analytics, but the kind that I've described is not likely to happen in the U.S. It'll happen in China first. Probably.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course, because it hasn't happened yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
MOE in China have made some projects about this, but it's really done work.
No, it's not yet, because you need to have you had to have all the data collected. Things have to be structured in a certain way. So you have learning objects and learner profiles and dynamic learner profiles, and then you have to have the algorithms. I think at least there's a couple places in Beijing and Shanghai where people are working on the algorithms, and so it's getting in that direction. But you're closer than we are in the U.S.
11th questions about the evolution of terms. Yeah. In our field, we have never stopped the piece to proceed the definition of the new term or the description of the terms. For example, education technology, instructional technology, learning technology is one set of these terms to differentiate and analyze. In other hand, grid computing, distributed computing, and cloud computing is another set of these terms to pursue the new terms. What is your opinion about it? We always pursue new terms.
Yeah, so I encountered someone in Hong Kong when I was giving a talk who said that things are changing so fast, we don't have the language to talk about these things. And so I don't believe that. So my response was, give me an example. And this person didn't realize that I was asking for her to talk about something that she should just said she can't talk about because there's no proper language. We can talk about these new technologies. So that's the first thing. We don't really need new language. I mean, if we have a new device, if you discover a new element, of course we need a new word. And when we had microprocessors and integrated circuits, we needed new words for those devices. But for the learning part, I don't think we need new words. So my idea, the definition of learning has not changed in 2,000, 4,000 years. Learning is characterized by a stable and persistent change of what a person or a group of people know and can do. How we support learning does change. So the support changes, but not learning. And then this distinction between learning and instruction is overdone, especially in the U.S. And it's happened for all the wrong reasons. But instruction is simply that which supports intentional learning. Instruction is whatever you devise to support learning. So the two are tightly linked together. And the kind of learning we care about is purposeful learning. Learning that's organized, so it's intentional learning. There's a goal. And instruction is aiming to help learners achieve this goal. So those two things are closely divided. In the U.S., though, we have this fight. And it's an artificial fight. It's a stupid fight between people who want to talk about instructional technology and people who want to talk about learning technology. The fad is to talk about learning technology. The reality is the two are interlinked. Now, the instructional technology people see this, but some of the people on the learning technology side or the learning science side don't see the tight coupling of learning and instruction. And the major journal in Europe is called Learning and Instruction. So this problem doesn't exist in Europe. And in my mind, the term educational technology is the broad term that covers it all, and which is appropriate. So I like the term educational technology. Of course, we have the Advanced Learning Technology Conference. But and that group developed a curriculum for advanced learning technologies. And of course, instruction is included in that curriculum. So that group, the people at ICOP recognize that, for example. I don't know if I answered your question. I didn't talk about grid computing, cloud computing, and so forth. That to me, that's an implementation issue. So it's not going to go to the pedagogy of the learning. It's going to be what's cost efficient and learning effective in terms of, what kind of support you have, technology support. And I don't know which of those is better. The trend seems to be towards cloud computing. In 2011, at the ICOL conference that I hosted at the University of Georgia, the theme was, because it was around cloud-based, was now getting a lot of prominence, cloudy with a slight chance of gain, not rain, but gain. So movement to cloud-based technology, but what I was trying to say was not likely that that's going to have a big effect on learning. It's going to make things more efficient maybe, or more convenient, but that's not going to improve learning. We need something more.
And we know Journal of Education Technology of Society have launched a special issue on large-scale implementation of academic research and academic industry collaboration in technology-supported education. One of the key words, in our opinion, is large-scale. And in your article titled as editorial on replication studies and scaling up efforts, the key words are large-scale impact studies, replication studies, and analysis. The three issues are these three words. Yeah.
Right.
Could you please explain about the starting point and the significance of these three initiatives?
Yeah, there's sort of two parts to this. One part is because I'm an old guy and I look back and think of what's happened in the last 50 years. And of course, technology has changed dramatically, and we've made all these promises that learning was going to improve dramatically, and it hasn't happened. So part of me wonders, why is that the case? In spite of all these powerful technologies, things are pretty much the same, and in some cases worse. So I wonder about that. And then I wonder about the scientific nature of educational technology. So if we think of ourselves as a scientific enterprise or an engineering enterprise, knowledge should be cumulative. We should be learning lessons from the past and building on that. And in educational technology research, there's a tendency not to do that. Every researcher wants to create their own instrument, do their own study, and it's typically a small-scale study in this school or this district or with regard to this technology, and that's the end of it. So, and because we don't know if it's going to scale up, will it generalize to other topics, other technologies, other schools? There's no evidence of that. So the idea of replication studies is to, first of all, share instruments. So share validated instruments that we know are reliable. So we should be sharing instrumentations and the research protocols. And so now we can build up knowledge over a series of studies and have confidence that what we learn from our research efforts is genuine. It's likely to generalize to other settings. So that's why we need replication studies. Meta-analysis is another way to get there. So you look at empirical studies that report effect sizes. And that, with regard to particular topics, such as, well, what's the impact of collaborative learning with regard to whatever, 8th grade science learning. And so you find all these studies, and then you look at the series of impact effect sizes to gain an idea of what the likely impact will be when we go to another setting. So meta-analysis is important. We typically are not doing meta-analysis in educational technology research. And large-scale studies we don't do because they tend to be longitudinal, they're very expensive, and who has the money to do this? In America, the funding agencies, the longest one they'll support is typically 5 years. And that typically is not enough. There's some examples of things that have worked, but they've been in sort of the periphery support efforts. So there was, years ago, there was a Center for Research on Educational Testing, CREST, that was set up at the University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA. Eva Baker is the head of that. So they now are still in existence long after funding left. So that's a place where people can put their assessment studies, their studies on standards, their studies on testing, and you can go there and gain some information. But that's the exception. That's not the rule. So we're not building a body of knowledge that accumulates over time. We're not being scientific. Or we're not being good engineers. We're not learning, when the building collapsed. Why did it collapse? That use of educational technology logo didn't work in the schools. Why didn't it work? We don't answer that question. The engineer is going to want to know why the building collapsed because they don't want to build another one that will collapse. But we don't ever go look at our failures and try and learn from them.
Yeah, you are the top expert in education technology. So when facing emerging technology in education, is there anything you'd like to address to the researchers in the field of ICT in K-12 education,
and even the
policymakers and administrators and teachers?
Yeah.
These
You
three.
can answer.
Okay, yeah, I can answer them together, yeah.
Yes.
With regard to the researchers, I've said this multiple times, and you'll hear it here too.
Yeah,
We have, as a discipline, the educational technology researchers tend to have too much faith that the solution to educational problems will be a particular technology. Along comes a new technology, and a researcher will fall in love with that technology and claim that it will solve everything. It could be mobile technology, it could be wearable technologies, and the truth is that is extremely unlikely that the one technology is going to be the solution to everything. So in general, a lot of researchers and technology advocates have what I call wrong-headed confidence in their beliefs about that technology. They believe too strongly that this is the solution and the only solution for not just this problem, but for all problems. It's just, that's not the way the world is. But so we keep promising too much on account of the technology, and it's no wonder people are reluctant to give us money because we've been lying for 50 years. That technology is not the solution. It's a tool that we can use to arrive at a solution. So that's what I say to researchers. Let's not be so arrogant as we have been. And I've been guilty, just like other people, of doing this. So. Policymakers and administrators, I mentioned this earlier, they listen to a select few of the researchers, and typically they listen to the loudest researchers, the ones that make these big claims that are just not likely to be true, and they don't talk to teachers, and they don't look at learners, and so they are inclined to make policies that just are not likely to work. So they need to come down to earth and walk into a school, but live in a school for a week with the elementary school kids and see what happens. And then the teachers themselves, I have a lot of respect for teachers. Initially I didn't. When I started that project with the poorly performing rural schools, I thought the teachers would be not very good, and they wouldn't be very smart, they wouldn't be dedicated. And it was just the opposite. So they were really better than most other teachers. They were dedicated. They wanted those disadvantaged kids to do well. Keep doing what you're doing, and keep demanding more support. So I have a lot of respect for teachers who are asked to do too much and paid too little, at least in my country.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.